Simplified IT Automation, a ScriptRunner production.
Hello and welcome to a new Inside IT Automation episode. My name is Heiko from ScriptRunner, and today I have Joe Houghes with me. He is a, architect at Pure Storage. He's working for VMware for quite a long time. You are also very active in the community, so thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Heiko. So yeah, howdy y'all. I'm Joe Houghes. I am a solutions architect at Pure Storage. I've been involved in the VMware ecosystem since probably 2004, 2005 timeframe. Really been active in the community since around 2017. I jumped into some leader roles. So I lead the VMware user group that's near me. Still trying to get the PowerShell user group back up off the ground. That one's been busy. And then I just do lots of things. You know, I made it into the Microsoft MVP program, just got re-ups for my second year. I'm a VMware vExpert. I'm a Veeam Vanguard. I'm a Cisco champion. I'm a Tanzu Vanguard. And then, was still helping out with vBrownBag on the side. So love being active in the community and talking to folks and just trying to help people actually solve their work problems so they can go home and do things that actually interest them.
Wow, that's cool. And we met last year at PSConf EU in Prague, where you did 2 sessions.
Yes, sir. Yeah, that was fun.
That was really fun. So maybe this will happen again. Who knows?
Yeah, I hope so.
That would be great. So as a little background, how do you started in IT, and what got you interested, and how did this involve learning PowerShell and also coming into this IT automation area?
Yeah, I kind of stumbled into IT. I mean, I early on was just a command line guy because of the fact that the only computer we had at home for the longest time was an old IBM 2286. So I started doing lots of batch scripting just because what I had was DOS to work with for the longest time. And then once I started getting in Windows environments with school computers, we were persistently just playing around with stuff just to see what we could do. Ended up scavenging a couple of computers that we had that were getting scrapped. So we pulled the parts out, basically built our own little LAN party in my one of my ROTC groups and, set it up so that we could play. Gosh, back in the day, this would have been Quake and probably some Warcraft 2.
Okay.
So yeah, old school days. And honestly, tech was fun. And then I kind of moved out into the world, went into the Air Force for a bit. And once I was getting out of it, I kind of stumbled back into tech. We just needed somebody to work on computer systems around the office. So I started getting into it. I ended up actually going down the path of moving towards a webmaster before I realized that was not something that was interesting for me. I really liked more of the networking, and from there I stumbled into virtualization and I was hooked. Once I could see the black magic of doing vMotions, live moving machines that were online from physical server to physical server, and even across office locations that were blocks away, in a downtown area, and seeing that we would, potentially lose 1 or 2 pings, it was magic, and I was hooked. And then wanted to learn how to do automation around it. So I jumped in early on. I actually just discovered a guy that's on my team that's been here at Pure for a couple of years. I knew him through a different organization when he was in another vendor. He was originally on the Exchange team back in the Monad days.
Wow!
So I started playing around with PowerShell back when it was MSH, when it was Monad Shell. And he didn't believe me that I was that old school with it until I pulled out my Monad book that actually lives on my shelf behind me to prove to him that I actually knew what he was talking about.
Wow.
I've just been with it since then. It's really been it's been a powerful tool, and to me, I really like automation for the fact that it becomes, for a lot of folks, the only sort of documentation you're going to have for your environment, sadly, that is really accurate for what happens. And I tell a lot of folks that's the easy way to try and sell your business on giving you time and resources to work on automation. It's the most accurate and most efficient, business process that you can put in place that also has documentation that validates what it's actually doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is like now, because PowerShell turns 18 this year, so you're using it for even longer period of time already.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I first started playing around with it in probably late 2006 or early 2007. And I mean, I stumbled into it as well. I only first found out about it going into production through somebody else that showed me the export of doing exchange commandlets. And I was like, oh my gosh, it actually happened. Like, people had been talking about it, and I knew it was in PowerShell. But once I saw that people that were not using the command line would actually see what was happening under the covers, that was really what was going to like start gaining traction with it.
Okay, so this was one of your, I would then say, first aha moments about, wow, these are things you can do with PowerShell. And then, okay, so that was the starting point. And so throughout your career, are there any specific highlights where you say, okay, this is where I use PowerShell and it improved the process, it speed up the process, it helped to have a consistent process or task that you implemented? Is there anything that comes to mind? Any examples?
Yeah, a lot of it was, working in environments, especially where I would go help somebody out with something, or where I was, the second or third admin that would take over an environment when I'd move to an organization, seeing that there were not standards necessarily, or the standards changed over time, but we never matched the environment to the current configuration of what we wanted, was always a pain and always an issue. So putting reporting in place was the easy way to show people the real power of what there was in automation, when we could see every available option or every available configuration that was in our environment, whether it was every available configuration for, say, a virtual machine or a server itself, versus the number of those that were across the environment that were not matching. That became an easy way for us to identify where there were potential issues, or where there were just inconsistencies that were enough that we wanted to actually put in changes to bring everything to the current standard. And then taking that reporting to show everybody the reality of not using standardization, not using tools, not using anything better than a process that primarily was screenshots saved in a Word document for years and years. Got everybody to understand, okay, the value of automation is not only can we deploy things to a standard and understand what this is, we can do things like tag or just put in plain text somewhere in a field that tells us this was the time that it was deployed and this is the version of the standard it was deployed to. And that deployment happens faster, but it's also easier for us to identify and know at this point in time, this was our standard. This was what we used for configuration. So when we go make changes, we now know everything that we need to look back at to say, maybe these need to be modified as well. That was really great, just for getting people a lot quicker and easier view for the reality of what was in their environments and what things may not be the most efficient use of resources, either through deployment or through configurations that weren't what we actually wanted.
All right. And this is already the time where you worked with VMware and PowerCLI. So PowerCLI was the module you were working with?
Yes, PowerCLI, even back in the day with running everything as snap-ins before moving to modules, it was absolutely that was where I first kind of got the concept of, I don't know exactly what happens when I use the UI to deploy a virtual machine. There are lots of defaults that are set that are not something that I've chosen. So I want to know what those are. And even if I'm going to do deployments and do automation, to use those defaults, because VMware determined that as a best practice, or for 80% of customers, this is what it should be as the default setting. I want to have those explicit, and I want to have those defined in my advanced parameters that I'm using. So I know everything that actually goes into my deployment. And then we could track over time, how changes make it into the environment, or as new features, as new configuration options come into the modules, we could see, ooh, hey, here's something that's new because it doesn't match the config that I had before. What is this? What do I go learn about now?
So it's basically, you're much more in control, right? If you're doing it this way, instead of just relying on doing something, clicking on something in the UI and hoping that everything under the hood works as you expect, right?
Right. Yeah, and again, even if it was using those same defaults because we didn't know better or had no compelling reason to change something, if we started doing deployments and we did manual deployments every once in a while to go just check our automation configurations, if manual deployments suddenly had different defaults, we would go try and look to say, okay, what is this? At least with new versions or new patches that would come out, occasionally defaults would change. So we wanted to kind of keep our environment up to current, but it forced us to learn a lot more about what was actually happening, where it would have been just assumed that these defaults changed from one version to the next, and we may not have known about it if we weren't using automation and hadn't set a standard.
All right. Cool. And so I remember actually one of your talks last year where I think it was about also like performance, where you showed a few examples like, okay, you can do it with a standard PowerCLI commandlets, but there are other ones where you have more control and they're much faster. And I was really surprised when I saw that. So that's probably came into the picture when you were really working with huge environments, I guess, where really performance matters, because instead of it takes 10 minutes, maybe it just goes down maybe to a couple of seconds, right?
Right. Yeah, moving to larger environments and moving to things. In this instance, it's moving from like get VM to get view. Get view gives you the more raw results that would match what you would get if you're querying the API directly. It doesn't have all the formatting. PowerCLI was fantastic for the fact that it was truly made for PowerShell administrators, but it would take the view of a virtual machine and really stuff it into a .NET PowerShell object, rather than giving you the raw API view in the format that it was intended and how the objects are actually constructed on the back end. So if you work with things in their native format or with a without needing kind of a middleware that's doing a translation with what it's giving back to you, obviously those things are going to be significantly more performant. And that was really what started getting me into understanding and working with web APIs. Because at that time, that was even back in the days when we were doing a lot of things either via XML or before we had invoke web request and invoke REST method. So it was truly parsing and scraping things off of web pages if we had to.
Yeah. So as I said, so this for me really was very interesting. And I think I will add the link to this session. I think it's on YouTube because I think for people who are using VMware, using PowerShell, PowerCLI, I think this is really something that really helps to kind of take it to another level, and to especially if people are in huge environments, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, to me, it was even just it was really interesting for the thought process of trying to understand that taking that step to the more raw or possibly to the more platform native commandlets and that back end that you're working with gives you a little bit more of an idea of, not only what a developer or anybody that's working with the APIs directly would see, but when VMware or whenever the product engineering is working on these things, that's the object that they're working with, not the translated one that you see inside of PowerShell. So it's just getting one step closer to how the core of the product actually works. Yeah. And typically knowing those things is not ever a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Plus, it really helps to improve the performance, right? I think this is
for sure. Yeah.
One of the
absolutely
one of the key things here as well. So yeah, so you started to use PowerShell, and at what time you got started being involved with the community very early on? Was this part of your learning process as well when you start using PowerShell?
Yeah, I got involved in the local VMware community back when I was in Texas. Gosh, probably in around 2008 or 2009, and it was really just where I was stuck and I was hitting problems, or I was hitting some issues with trying to do things at a significantly larger scale at a different organization. And as I focused less on solely VMware, and at that time I was doing a lot of administration through SCCM, I was really needing to pick up a decent amount more on my PowerShell chops, and found a couple of folks that were super proficient at PowerShell just through PowerCLI. But at those VMware user groups, I met folks who connected me through the network to other people in town that were very, very proficient at PowerShell. And that really kind of got me expanding outside of just doing my local meetups and doing the bigger online community. So that really dragged me early on into getting connected on Spiceworks and then getting connected on PowerShell.org to some folks. And that helped me a lot in my day job. But then a couple of years later, once I really got active in trying to help host things for the user group and just be more active, even at the local meetings. I mean, that truly accelerated my career, by years versus where I would have been if I had just sat in my cubicle doing my day job.
Yeah. Amazing. And are there any specific, let's say, platforms or sites you go to if you have, if you want to find out or if you have any questions?
Yeah, at this point, I would say currently, Reddit ends up being one of my number ones.
Okay.
I'm actually a mod on a couple of subreddits for some products that I've worked on in the past.
All right.
Spiceworks is still a fantastic option for the forum and the community.
Yeah.
There are a lot of communities that are now spun up on Discord. There's still a decent number of us that are semi-active on Twitter, so you can still go there and look for help.
Yeah. True.
I mean, it's really just kind of finding any platform where people are at and being willing to be open and just ask a question. And for a lot of folks, unfortunately, that's a big hurdle to the first time go ask for help. Yeah. None of this is saying that, you are either not smart or haven't tried. It's just that you need something that is beyond the realm of knowledge that you currently possess. And you're hoping that someone in the community can connect you with somebody else or give you an idea of the next step to go look at. And if people are willing to go ask those questions and have those discussions, then almost any platform, there are a lot of us that are out there looking out for each other, and we'll do our best to help you out, at least on your way to find your answer.
Absolutely. I mean, this is my experience as well. And I would say, especially with the PowerShell community, this is really one of the most welcoming and helpful community I ever was part of, really.
Oh, absolutely.
So so I think this is for everyone who's looking for answers. This is a great way, but of course now I also have to ask you on the AI topic, of course, because I have to say I'm using ChatGPT quite a lot, and Claude now also started to use it for some PowerShell stuff. What is your take on AI? Is it something that helps you? Do you work with it on a regular basis?
I do. So like I use ChatGPT. I pay the monthly subscription on my own to use it. Right. For a long time, we had a standing with the company. Nobody was allowed to use it with any company IP or anything. But really, it was just more of understanding where it's a proper tool for you. So I use ChatGPT a lot for just trying to understand. Number one, I've gotten to the point that I forget so many shortcuts and so many aliases that folks have, that if I don't get something that makes sense to me when I copy and paste my code into VS Code and have it expand everything, then I will go ask ChatGPT to just go explain something for me, because sometimes that's faster than digging through the help to find a particular thing. Or sometimes I will go into ChatGPT even just to ask, what is a more efficient way of doing this? Because that's one of the things, is really just trying to understand what's maybe even just the learning model from it having looked at somebody else's code, or how somebody else has made a description of what they've done. It might give you a different idea or a different perspective than what you're currently stuck on doing. And then honestly, seeing all the work that Doug Fink has done with PowerShell and AI has been fantastic. Even when I'm not using it for the AI bits itself, to not actually go get answers from it, just digging through his code and seeing what he's done. Similar to, when he released Import Excel, I love digging into other people's tools to just understand how are they doing it. And Doug being, a true developer that is building PowerShell tools, I learned so much from just digging into what it is that he's doing, that I find all sorts of crazy features or really interesting ways of working with other platforms and bringing them back into PowerShell. So, less so just the AI. Sometimes it's even just looking at the tooling. Interesting
because, I'm talking to him I would say quite frequently. And
Mhm.
when he explained, like, okay, he found this, how this integration was done based on Python, and he was thinking,
Yeah.
that should be something that should be also work with PowerShell. And okay, and
Yeah.
he just did it, right? This is really
Right.
really amazing. Awesome. So maybe coming back to this PowerCLI PowerShell topic again. So for someone who maybe is going to start using it, are there any, let's say, things, obstacles, or things like that you stumbled upon at the beginning, where you say, okay, these are things people should be aware of when they start using PowerCLI in maybe in specific settings? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Not hugely. I mean, I still try and advise most people to start with reporting, and similar to the basics with PowerShell, right? Start with get commands before you set anything.
Oh yes.
But
And
even for people that are poking around, you know, I even tell folks, if they can't figure out how to do something inside of PowerCLI, there are fantastic options. If you do have vCenter, which you can at least get on a 60-day evaluation basis to put it in your environment and run it in a lab. There is an option for code capture inside of there. So if you go make changes inside of the UI, it will produce the code for you to be able to do these things inside of PowerShell. And most of it is decently efficient PowerShell code, right? It's not just pipelined weird snippets that get put together. It's actually pretty decent output on it. So understanding what tools and what other tricks and methods are in the repertoire that you can use, whether it's in the platform or looking at blog articles. I mean, there are so many people that for 20 years blogged everything they could about VMware and about PowerCLI and working with the APIs. Even if you can't find a direct thing that you're trying to do inside of PowerCLI, something may exist in the ESX CLI command line or within the API itself that you can just wrap some PowerShell around it and make a functional tool out of it. So don't limit yourself by just trying to find an exact command that does the thing that you want to do. Because even just 2 or 3 months ago, I had a customer that was looking for something to try and set some advanced storage adapter options, which I, for the life of me, could not find anywhere other than the API or accessing through ESX CLI. So I put it in PowerCLI by just running, you know, the get ESX CLI commandlet that would run those CLI commands under the cover, but basically return it in PowerShell, right? There's always some sort of a trick. So, you know, just don't limit yourself to the things that you can currently think of. Yeah,
absolutely. Great advice. And I think where also VMware really did a great job is really in the documentation, right? I mean, this is really compared maybe even to, well, not mentioning MS Graph and stuff like that and PowerShell, but this documentation is really awesome. So
there were some really good folks in the community, even some folks that were doing a lot of really good tech marketing when at VMware that put in a lot of effort to make sure that the documentation for PowerCLI was done well, but then also just the actual APIs themselves. So for you to get in and understand all the inner workings of what exists for the objects you're working with, that's documented really well. So it's a great place to go and search for things and actually find it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess this is maybe a great segue to talk about VMware in general. As we all know, it's now owned by Broadcom, and it looks like things are changing. And I'm not sure if it's for the better. So from your side, because you are of course running a user group, what is your experience since, let's say, last year autumn when Broadcom took over VMware?
I mean, legitimately, and to be perfectly honest, it's difficult. I love VMware. I'm not yet to the point that I could say that I love Broadcom. I'm not certain that I will ever get there, right? It's just, it's a different beast. It's a whole different machine, right? VMware is a company that had great culture and a lot of folks were there to help. They were not just running it as a product for a profit, right? Is what I can say, really. And it's difficult. It went from VMware being easily accessible. I mean, even from the community aspect, the fact that there is no longer a free ESXi hypervisor that everybody can go download and put in their lab environment, that makes it difficult. Fortunately, we have the VMware user group, and I can advise for a lot of people to go spend, $200 a year or $180 with the discount to go get the vMug Advantage and get access to everything, mostly everything that's in the product portfolio. But that's a significant spend, right? And that's not something that somebody can easily just go grab a download link, put it in their environment, and play around with it for free. Some things have been good. We've seen that VMware Workstation and VMware Fusion are now free for personal use. So anybody that's running Workstation on Windows or Linux can go get it for free. Anybody that wants to run Fusion on Mac can go get it for free. But it's not the same hypervisor. It's not the same environment you're going to have. For somebody that's trying to train up, maybe for somebody that wants to become a sysadmin that doesn't have those skills now and wants to just learn on their own, or for anybody that wanted to run a hypervisor at home to just use for their home lab and have nothing to do with what they were doing at work. That's not an easy option anymore. So two different things. For existing customers, it is difficult. The licensing has changed. It has been drastically simplified because there are basically only a handful of SKUs you can get now, but you're basically buying kind of what was previously like the enterprise product, or you're getting the entire bundle of basically everything in the product suite from VMware, and legitimately the price has gone up for that. So for customers that were used to basically just having a lot of standalone hosts and may or may not have even had vCenter inside of their environment, that are now trying to figure out everything that's included in the new license that they get, it's a big uplift. There's a lot of things to get to. And I have this conversation regularly with folks a lot, not only as a user group leader, but even trying to advise, other SEs that work at Pure. It's difficult to get out of the vSphere ecosystem because of the fact that VMware commoditized the hypervisor. They made things very, very easy to do in the host UI, and especially if you had vCenter, most everything was a right-click option to change a setting and do whatever you need to, or there were easy workflows with, an orchestration product to do it for free. So moving from that to now basically having to deal with a raw hypervisor, or dealing with, kind of standalone Linux hosts that have some orchestration around them, it's a difficult switch. So yeah, it is hard. There's not an easy on-ramp for anybody that wants to get into VMware administration the way that there had been even months ago with having, the free hypervisor. And we have lots of folks that are trying to figure out what to do now. And, fortunately I had many years of dealing with Hyper-V administration, right? I had a couple of shops where we ran Hyper-V side by side with VMware. I had exposure early on to KVM, and have tried many of the variants of that along the years. So I'm at least proficient at most hypervisors, but I also have worked with a lot of them enough to know here are the limitations to running these things at scale, or I don't ever want to have that experience again. OpenStack is doing phenomenal now, but having been somebody who had to try and build a cluster back in 2013 or 2014, I would not want to go back to that experience. But really that's what a lot of folks are trying to do. They're trying to go back and investigate from scratch. The default option that I had that was no choice. It was just what we used because it was the standard. People are now trying to figure out, okay, what else is out there, and what features do I actually need? How much of this do I really need to do at scale? I think this is actually, people think like, okay, it's very easy to do it with VMware, but maybe they can really, at least in some areas, think about, okay, we can do it differently because we don't need the whole, let's say, feature set. Right.
So I guess the landscape really kind of, I think maybe not drastically, but will change. Yeah, that's
it was. It was typically easy for a lot of organizations to take their IT budget and roll like production and development and lab and some, backup DR things all into one environment because they had the hardware to do it. They were having to buy on 3 or 5 year, life cycles. They had more than what they needed in a lot of organizations, so they could just use those resources because they wanted them consumed. Now people are actually having to try and determine, like, where do I need advanced features? Where do I just need a VM that's running? Where can I maybe put an entire environment onto a free hypervisor that nobody does a whole lot of management with? because it's not super painful for a development team or something.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and coming back to PowerShell, of course, knowing PowerShell, I think is great because, okay, if there's a module like PowerCLI for VMware, there might be other modules for other platforms. So you can use your existing skill and just move on maybe to other platforms or to additional platforms, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that the majority of my focus has moved to cloud, I still do some VMware, but it's not the core part of what I do. Having to be proficient in Azure and AWS, having to do a lot of things now, even back in Hyper-V and doing things on Server 2025 with some new improvements that are coming out on it. I'm very glad to have the PowerShell chops that I do, because it's it makes me much more relevant to organizations where I may not be the most up to date on the features and a lot of the work that's going on there, but the fact that I can step in and work with a core skill set for automating a lot of these things helps make up for some of the other differences.
And as once in a while you can read these comments on LinkedIn or other platforms where people say, well, because of PowerShell, they have a different kind of career. They can go to positions where they couldn't without knowing PowerShell. So this is right. Really, and it's still happening, right? It's
absolutely.
I would say it's really alive and kicking. So maybe that's kind of to end our conversation. So how do you see the future of PowerShell?
Honestly, I see it expanding. It's amazing to see how many people are running PowerShell that were never Windows administrators, right? That didn't come up in the days of learning it through Git process and getting and Git command and learning the help on the fly with a lot of people that came in at PowerShell 2.0. Now seeing that it's version 7, that it's running on Linux and Mac, and seeing how many people are getting their first exposures to PowerShell on PowerShell preview now, even asking, how do I do this thing, and how do I translate something from Python, or how do I take something that is a core Linux function or things and work better with my aliases in PowerShell. It's cool to see that it's now a whole new ecosystem and a whole new generation of administrators that were not Windows people that moved into better automation, right? So it's cool to see that it's now a whole different thing than what it was in the days of Monad Shell or moving to PowerShell 1 and 2.
So it's really it's my experience as well. So it's really not only a vital community, but also the way that the PowerShell team at Microsoft is developing, evolving the platform is really very, very, very promising, I would say. So
I loved it. I mean, I had an opportunity. I was talking to somebody that was asking me some questions about some Ansible and Terraform things, and I told them oh, hey, I have this thing in a lab. I don't know how to do it natively in Ansible or Terraform well. So I wrapped some PowerShell that will go do it. And they were like, oh, I had no idea PowerShell would do this thing. So they learned something. They showed me how they do it in Ansible and Terraform. And they kind of wanted to know more about PowerShell. So I told them, okay, if you're invested and want to read up on it a little bit, go read the Monad Manifesto, where it came from and what was the, Jeffrey Snover in the origins of it, saying, basically we will grow this thing, and if you commit to this, it's gonna take you places in your career. Was fantastic. And through that conversation with that person was how they actually reconnected me to somebody else on my team and said, oh, by the way, did you know this person was on the Exchange team? I read about that in that Shell of an Idea book that somebody passed me. And I was like, oh, that's cool. So random connections in the community all over the place, right? We work with each other, and things always come around in a circle at some point.
Absolutely. And that's the great thing, right? And as I mentioned, especially in the PowerShell community, it's just great being part of it. That's yes. And what you just described is really, so let's say for someone who is maybe not using PowerShell at the moment, I think start using it, because it will definitely benefit your career and your knowledge, and you will meet a lot of great people.
Absolutely.
So Joe, thanks a lot for taking the time. It was a very, very interesting conversation. I think a lot of valuable information in there for people, especially using PowerShell with VMware. And again, thanks a lot. And see you in the next episode. Bye-bye. And keep on scripting.